Scalar and functional processes. This is a fancy way of saying that the design of an organization had to be made scalable so it could get larger by replicating its parts. So like the Gates Rubber Company would create a small team of people who did a certain thing. If they needed more of that product, more belts to be produced, they would create another team just like it. So you'd have twice as many. It was scalable, and the processes within each team were the same. Structure. How were things processed? Who was in charge of the whole thing? Who had opportunities? Who had obligations? Who had the power? Who had the authority? So there had to be a structure, and we look at these now as hierarchical. And they're important to realize that when organizations started, they didn't have the hierarchies that we take for granted. And finally, span of control. How many people could one manager, one boss effectively watch over, motivate, and measure? So those are the four elements of the classical school. Our chain of command or organizational structure, organization chart came out of this early approach, and you see on the chart now a simple organization chart. It says that manager A, B, and C work for the manager at the top, and the lines below those three managers represent people who work for them. If you go into any organization of any size today, you'll find organization charts. They are generally good for understanding the organization. They are not as powerful or as valuable for understanding who has the most power and who has the most authority in an organization. In the theory of, under the theory of classical management is an idea called scientific management. It was started by a guy named Frederick Taylor, who was an American, who really wanted to figure out what was the best way for organizations to process information. It was very management focused. In other words, it was top down. Management was always right. Management knew what to do. Management was responsible, and workers were only cogs in a wheel. They were just parts of machinery. He believed that there was one best way to perform tasks, whether it was digging holes or putting the tires or engines in a car, and he wanted to find that best way. And to do that, he would go into a factory and find the people or the team who could do that function as the most efficiently. And by efficiently, he meant how many things could they produce in the shortest amount of time. And he used what we call now time and motion studies. How much time did each function take? And he'd write that down, mark it on a clipboard, and he would measure each competing group. And the one that did it the best had their process adopted for the entire organization. Interestingly, Taylor didn't believe in the value of human interaction. He thought it was unhealthy. He thought that if people talked to even each other within a peer group, that would be a loss of productivity and a waste of time. He called it soldiering. It was a peculiar term, but he said people should go to work, should do their work, should leave. He didn't think there was anything social or valuable to be had from the individuals within an organization. He became so famous for this, he gave testimony before Congress in 1905. He wrote down all of his ideas in a couple of famous books, and you can still see some of this time and motion study process used today in some organizations. In particular, in organizations like cashiers. If you notice, when you go to Target stores, each clerk has a measurement on his or her screen that says you did well on the last 4 or 5 checkouts. You worked within the parameters. And if they were slow or didn't do things as efficiently as possible, it'll tell them on the screen. And then that gets rolled up to their bosses, and if they don't do well over a period of time, they have to improve or they lose their job. Same way in call centers, where people are taking calls about everything from complaints about a piece of equipment to help desk. They are measured by the number of keystrokes and by the amount of time they spend on the phone with somebody. So if somebody seems to be wanting to get off the phone when you're calling about a product, yeah, they are, because they are measured by how many calls they complete in a given period of time. So time and motion studies are still with us, despite the fact that a lot of Taylor's ideas have been judged not practical or not valuable for today's workers. Next in our hierarchy under the classical school is a guy named Henri Fayol, who was a French mining engineer who thought more broadly about what the processes of an organization should be. He worked in the mines in France, and again, he looked at how things were being done, and he copied down, wrote down the processes that he thought of. And his wasn't so much about the actual work being done, but about the function of organizations. And he tried to organize companies in a larger sense. He said that there were 5 basic processes, 5 basic tasks of managers in organizations. One was planning. You know, how do you know, how do you forecast, how do you project, how do you get all of the elements in place over time? Organizing, how do you deploy people and materials for the best outcome for the company? Commanding, which is kind of a, and you'll notice over time that a lot of the concepts come from the military, command and control. But commanding was a concept that Fayol brought to the mix, and he said, here's how you tell people what to do to get the maximum output, the optimal return on your investment. Coordinating, this is what we think of more modernly as the role of management, getting people to work together in a productive way that helps get the job of the organization done. And finally, controlling, and in this sense it doesn't mean telling people what to do and make sure they do it, but more in the sense of a controller or a financial manager who's looking at what was the plan and how did we do versus that plan. So Fayol had a bigger concept of management and the way an organization should run. Important point for this, again, is all of these elements demand a certain kind of communication, and we'll talk about how that works later. This chart shows Fayol's bridge. He had the concept that, which was opposed to the idea of Taylor, that there is some value in managers talking to managers without going through the hierarchy of the organization, that it's more efficient to get people who are involved or responsible to one another, who depend on one another, to talk together without having to go up the chain, getting the message translated, sent back down. And it was an efficiency measure. And you know from playing the old kids game telephone, that messages can get mixed and confused when they go through too many nodes. Next on our list is a guy named Max Weber, who was a German who developed the theory of bureaucracy. Now, in his concept, bureaucracy was a good thing. It helped make organizations consistent. It helped processes become productive and helpful and get things done. Bureaucracy in our minds is generally a roadblock. Helps nothing. Wastes time, wastes energy, and slows things up. Weber said that there are 2 types of authority. Charismatic, where the leader is a interesting person who has great ideas, who can portray them well and can get people to work with him or her. We can think of some of the great leaders like Ronald Reagan, charismatic leadership, Martin Luther King, inspiring, wonderful speakers, get people to work with them by dint of their personality. Weber also said there was something called a traditional source of authority, which means that the authority comes from the organization, not from the individual as much. And we see bureaucrats today who generally take their authority from the organization or the position that they are found in.